welcome to The Explainer. I'm really pumped you're hanging out with us today because we're diving into an absolute classic. We are unpacking a brilliantly funny excerpt from the legendary novel, The Three Musketeers, which famously recounts the tales of elite fighters under the French monarchy. But here's the catch. We aren't starting with some polished, unbeatable warrior. No way. We are starting with the incredibly clunky, honestly hilarious beginnings of our larger-than-life hero, the young D'Artagnan. It's this amazing story of pride, of totally misplaced confidence, and of course, a very, very unusual horse.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Just picture it. What exactly happens when a fiercely proud, total hothead of a teenager rides into town on a bright yellow pony and just immediately tries to pick a fight with a seasoned, highly respected swordsman? Well, obviously, it is a recipe for absolute disaster, and that's exactly the glorious mess we're going to explore today. We're going to break down the text, analyze what makes these characters tick, and pull out the real, timeless lessons hidden inside this highly comical confrontation.
So, Section 1, the young hero sets out. Our story kicks off on the first Monday of April, 1625. We're in the busy market town of Meung, France. Imagine this huge, noisy crowd gathering right in front of the Jolly Miller Inn. Now, context is totally key here. In this era, random fights and sudden attacks were literally daily happenings. People were always on edge, just waiting to grab their swords or muskets. And riding right smack into this intense, high-stakes environment is our guy, a swaggering 18-year-old wearing a faded blue woolen doublet, a feathered cap, and this ridiculously long, dangling sword that just keeps whacking against his poor horse as he rides.
The text actually notes that the citizens rushed toward the inn because they could plainly see the main cause of the hubbub. It's a fantastic vocabulary word from the passage. A hubbub basically just means a massive amount of noise and chaotic activity, usually caused by a big crowd. D'Artagnan is literally causing a huge scene before he even does a single thing, simply because of how striking and honestly how bizarre he looks trotting down the street.
Now, right before he left home, D'Artagnan's dad gave him some incredibly heavy, dramatic advice. He basically tells his son, never sell this horse, allow it to die honorably of old age. He also commands him, never fear quarrels, but seek adventures. Right? No pressure at all. So his dad sends him off into the world with exactly 15 crowns, a recipe for some miraculous healing balm from his mom, a letter of introduction to the great nobleman, Monsieur de Treville, and, well, this horse. It was supposed to be this incredibly noble send-off, but the reality of the gift is kind of different.
Which brings us to Section 2, the ridiculous yellow pony. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole core conflict we're looking at. Over on one side, you've got young D'Artagnan. Sure, he's a smart kid, he's a decent rider, but he's perched on top of a 13-year-old pony that is literally yellow, like a yellow horse with a very peculiar, awkward walk. On the flip side, lounging near an open window at the inn, is this older gentleman. He's maybe 40 or 45, well-built, totally stern-looking with these piercing eyes and a perfectly shaped black mustache. And he's just casually chatting with two listeners who are treating him with almost comical amounts of respect.
Now, the author uses the word steed to describe D'Artagnan's horse. A steed is, a horse used for riding, but it usually implies something super grand and spirited. The irony here is just dripping off the page. D'Artagnan had actually sighed deeply when he accepted this quote-unquote steed because he knew, probably better than anyone, exactly how ridiculous he looked sitting on it. In a society where literally everyone fancied themselves an expert on horses, riding a yellow pony was basically an absolute magnet for mockery.
And sure enough, D'Artagnan quickly realizes the stern, older gentleman isn't talking about him at all. He's roasting his horse. The guy is just casually listing all the horse's weird qualities, and his two listeners are practically rolling on the floor. The text describes their reaction as mirth, which simply means amusement or laughter. But for a proud, hot-headed teenager, the sound of loud mirth directed his way is completely unbearable. It's like throwing gasoline straight onto a fire.
Our source text makes this absolute gem of a literary comparison here. It says, D'Artagnan was rather like Don Quixote, meaning just as Don Quixote famously mistook windmills for giant monsters and sheet for enemy armies, D'Artagnan took every single smile for a mortal insult. The kid is a walking powder keg. His fist is constantly clenched. His hand is perpetually hovering over the hilt of his fierce-looking sword. His whole sense of self-worth is entirely wrapped up in how other people perceive him.
Moving into Section 3. Insult, pride, and swords.
Let's move to and see how this builds because it escalates, step by step. First, the stranger just drops the ultimate insult, calling the horse a buttercup, pointing out that yellow is a color well known in botany but super rare among horses. Second, D'Artagnan just loses it. He advances angrily, one hand gripping his sword, the other planted on his hip. Third, he tries so hard to be intimidating, but he's so blindingly angry he can only stammer and wave his fist around. And finally, the absolute worst part for our hero, the stranger just coldly ignores him, casually saying, "I was not speaking to you, sir."
D'Artagnan views this guy as unbelievably impertinent, which means disrespectfully rude. He practically demands to know more about this impertinent person, who has the absolute audacity to make fun of him, declaring that no man is allowed to laugh when it displeases him. But the older gentleman, he's completely unbothered. He just gives a little smile and coolly replies that he retains the right to laugh whenever he pleases.
And really pay attention to how D'Artagnan reacts when he's hit with this wall of cool, collected confidence. He had this whole grand, heroic speech fully prepped in his head, but because his anger was just boiling over so intensely, all he could do was stammer, meaning to speak with extreme difficulty, and shake an angry fist in the air. His emotions completely short-circuited his logic and his words. Honestly, he's losing the battle before the swords are even drawn.
But of course, the swords do get drawn. The gentleman just kind of turns on his heel to walk away, tossing out a dismissive, "Well, that is perfectly all right." But there is no way D'Artagnan is letting him escape that easily. He yanks out his huge sword, screams at the man to turn around, and makes this wild, furious lunge. The stranger smoothly draws his own weapon, but right at that exact split second, the stranger's two companions completely ambush D'Artagnan from the side. Suddenly, our young hero is hopelessly outnumbered.
And here comes the truly crushing humiliation. The older gentleman realizes in an instant he doesn't even need to fight this hot-headed kid himself. He just calmly sheathes his sword and literally becomes a spectator to the brawl. D'Artagnan manages to fight on for a few seconds, but finally he takes a hit and drops his weapon, and the sword literally just falls apart. It breaks. His grand defining weapon is useless, he is thoroughly beaten, and the townspeople come rushing from all over just to gawk at the spectacle. It is a complete, utter disaster for our proud protagonist.
All right, let's wrap this up with Section 4, Lessons in True Courage.
So the crucial point we really need to take away from this explainer is captured perfectly in the text's core theme here. Courage is not just in the physical sword you carry, but in exactly how you carry yourself when you're being mocked or doubted. D'Artagnan genuinely thought courage meant you had to physically fight anyone who even smiled at his yellow pony. But true courage, the kind that older, seasoned gentlemen displayed, that's about remaining calm. It's having this deep internal strength that doesn't get rattled by a stranger's mirth or impertinence. D'Artagnan's sword fell apart, physically, because his mental foundation of pride was incredibly fragile to begin with.
I want to leave you with a quick thought to chew on today. If you were the one wearing D'Artagnan's faded blue doublet, and your dad gave you a ridiculous 13-year-old yellow pony, and you suddenly found yourself being mocked by a crowd of strangers, honestly, would you have drawn your sword to defend your wounded pride, or do you think you'd have the internal courage to just keep your cool? It's a huge question of maturity, and it's one our young hero's definitely going to have to figure out as his adventures continue. Thank you so much for exploring this classic piece of literature with me today. Keep learning, keep reflecting on these stories, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.